Before your feet even hit the floor this morning, something is already trying to take control of your day, your thoughts, not your circumstances, not your schedule, your thoughts. Because the real battle is never just outside of you, it begins inside of you, in the quiet moments when no one is watching and no one is speaking, but your mind is. And what you allow it to say first will often decide everything that follows. Now imagine this. What if the first voice you heard today wasn't fear, wasn't pressure, wasn't yesterday's problems replaying in your mind, but truth? What if before anxiety had a chance to build momentum, your spirit was already anchored in peace, already standing in authority, already speaking victory over the entire day ahead? The first words you speak each morning carry more power than most people realize, because they establish the direction of your thoughts, emotions, and expectations before the day fully begins. Many people wake up and immediately allow fear, stress, or pressure to control their thinking. Before they even get out of bed, their minds are already overwhelmed with responsibilities, worries, disappointments, or uncertainty about the future. Without realizing it, they begin speaking defeat over the very day they are about to walk through. Words such as, "Today is going to be stressful," "I can't handle this," or "Nothing ever changes for me," may seem small in the moment, but they immediately shape the emotional atmosphere of the mind. The heart begins moving in the direction of those words. Anxiety rises, energy decreases, hope weakens, and before the day even truly starts, fear has already been given influence. This is why the first words spoken each morning matter so deeply. Morning words are like seeds planted into the atmosphere of the day. What is spoken early often continues influencing thoughts and emotions for hours afterward. If fear speaks first, the mind naturally follows fear. But if faith speaks first, the heart begins aligning with peace and confidence instead. Many people underestimate the importance of starting the day intentionally. They think mornings are simply routines to get through quickly. But spiritually and emotionally, mornings are powerful because the mind is highly impressionable during those first moments after waking. Whatever enters the mind first often becomes the dominant emotional tone for the rest of the day. This is why beginning with faith-filled confession changes everything. When a person wakes up and declares, "This day is in God's hands. I will walk in peace today. Fear will not control my mind. I have strength for every challenge ahead. Wisdom will guide me today," something shifts internally. Those words begin creating emotional alignment with truth rather than fear. Even if circumstances remain uncertain, the heart becomes steadier because the day has started from a position of faith instead of panic. Another important truth is that the morning often determines mental momentum. Thoughts gain strength through repetition and focus. If negative thinking dominates the beginning of the day, it becomes easier for discouragement and anxiety to continue growing throughout the day. But when truth and faith are established first, negative thoughts lose some of their influence. This does not mean challenges disappear instantly. Difficult situations may still arise. Pressure may still come. But a person who begins the day speaking faith responds differently to those pressures than someone who begins the day in fear. Their emotions remain more stable because their inner atmosphere was strengthened before the challenges arrived. Morning confession also renews identity. Many people spend years speaking weakness over themselves without realizing the damage it creates. Statements like, "I am exhausted," "I'll never change," or "I'm not strong enough" slowly become internal beliefs. Over time, those beliefs shape behavior and expectation. But when mornings begin with truth-filled words, identity starts shifting. A person begins seeing themselves through the lens of strength, peace, and possibility rather than limitation and fear. Daily confession gradually rewires thinking patterns until faith becomes more natural than discouragement. Another powerful aspect of morning words is that they influence emotional energy. Fearful speech drains emotional strength quickly. Complaining, negativity, and anxious thinking create heaviness within the mind and body. But faith-filled speech produces hope and peace. It creates emotional stability that allows a person to handle pressure more effectively. A peaceful beginning often creates a steadier day. This is why discipline in the morning matters so much. Many people wait until they feel motivated before speaking faith. But true authority is developed through consistency, not emotion alone. Some mornings a person may feel discouraged or tired, yet choosing to speak faith anyway builds spiritual strength over time. Every morning becomes an opportunity to decide which voice will dominate the day, fear or faith. If fear speaks first, anxiety grows stronger. If faith speaks first, peace grows stronger. Morning words also shape expectation. A person who wakes up expecting problems often notices negativity more throughout the day. But a person who begins with faith-filled expectation becomes more aware of opportunities, guidance, and moments of favor. Their perspective shifts because expectation shapes perception. Another important truth is that what enters the mind first usually lingers longest. This is why beginning the day with prayer, scripture, or faith-filled confession is so powerful. It fills the mind with truth before stress and distractions attempt to dominate attention. Over time, consistent morning confession builds emotional resilience. A person no longer reacts emotionally to every difficulty because they have trained their spirit daily through intentional faith-filled speech. Peace becomes more natural. Confidence grows stronger. Fear loses authority. Eventually, mornings stop being ruled by anxiety and become moments of alignment and preparation. The person begins walking into the day with quiet confidence instead of emotional chaos. And this transformation does not happen through one dramatic moment alone. It happens through small, consistent choices every morning to speak life instead of fear, peace instead of panic, and faith instead of defeat. Because the first words you speak each day are not merely expressions, they are setting the direction your heart and mind will follow throughout the day ahead. Spiritual authority does not begin when problems appear, it begins long before the battle ever arrives. Many people wait until fear, pressure, or difficulty enters their lives before they try to build faith. But by then, emotions are already unsettled, the mind is already overwhelmed, and fear has already gained influence. True authority is developed in preparation, not panic. It is established quietly in the heart before circumstances ever demand it. A soldier does not train in the middle of war. Strength, discipline, and readiness are developed beforehand. In the same way, spiritual authority grows through consistent prayer, confession, and renewal of the mind before challenges appear. When a person waits until fear arrives before turning to faith, they often feel unstable. But when faith has already been strengthened daily, challenges no longer shake the heart the same way. Many people live reactively instead of proactively. They respond emotionally to every situation because they have not built spiritual stability ahead of time. Fear speaks, and they immediately panic. Pressure increases, and they immediately lose peace. Difficult news arrives, and discouragement quickly follows. Their emotional condition rises and falls according to circumstances because authority was never established before the battle appeared. But a person who develops authority beforehand responds differently. They may still face pressure, but pressure does not dominate them. They may still encounter uncertainty, but uncertainty does not control their thoughts. They may still experience difficulty, but difficulty does not destroy their peace. This difference is not because they never faced problems. It is because they prepared spiritually before those problems arrived. Authority begins in the unseen realm of daily habits. Quiet moments of prayer, faith-filled confession, meditation on truth, and disciplined thinking may not appear dramatic outwardly, but they are strengthening the inner life continuously. Over time, those practices create stability that remains steady when external situations become difficult. Many people underestimate the importance of preparation because they only focus on visible battles. But unseen preparation is often what determines visible victory later. This is why morning prayer and confession are so powerful. When a person begins their day strengthening their spirit before engaging with the pressures of life, they create internal alignment with peace instead of anxiety. They prepare their mind before stress attempts to dominate it. Without preparation, fear enters easily. Fear thrives in unguarded minds. If the mind is left vulnerable, anxiety quickly fills it with worst-case scenarios, emotional pressure, and discouragement. But preparation creates resistance against fear. A prepared spirit recognizes fear and refuses agreement with it. Another important truth is that authority is closely connected to identity. A person who does not understand who they are spiritually will struggle to stand firm during difficulty. If someone sees themselves as powerless, defeated, or helpless, they will respond to life from that mindset. But preparation builds confidence in identity. Daily confessions such as, "I am strengthened by God. I will not be overcome. Peace rules my mind. Fear has no authority over me," gradually shapes identity. Over time, the person begins seeing themselves differently. They no longer view themselves as victims of circumstances, but as people capable of standing firm through faith. Authority also requires consistency. Many people seek occasional moments of inspiration, but authority is not built through occasional emotional experiences alone. It is developed through repeated practice. Every day a person chooses truth over fear, their spiritual foundation becomes stronger. This process may seem gradual, but consistency creates deep roots. Just as a tree withstands storms because its roots developed over time, a person withstands emotional and spiritual pressure because their faith was strengthened consistently before difficulty appeared. Another important aspect of authority is emotional stability. People without preparation often become emotionally overwhelmed quickly because their peace depends entirely on circumstances remaining comfortable. But prepared faith remains steadier because it was built before the pressure arrived. This does not mean emotions disappear completely. Fear may still attempt to rise. Discouragement may still try to appear. But a prepared heart recovers more quickly because truth has already been established deeply within. Preparation also changes reactions. An unprepared person reacts impulsively to fear, but a prepared person pauses, remembers truth, and responds from a place of stability instead of panic. This difference becomes especially visible during unexpected challenges. When sudden problems arise, preparation determines whether a person collapses emotionally or remains steady internally. Another powerful truth is that authority established before battle creates peace during battle. A person who spends time strengthening their spirit daily enters situations differently. Their confidence does not depend entirely on external conditions because their inner life has already been anchored in truth. Over time, preparation transforms mindset completely. Instead of waking each day expecting defeat, the person begins expecting guidance, strength, and peace. Fear loses some of its influence because faith has become stronger through daily practice. Eventually, authority becomes natural rather than forced. The person no longer waits until crisis to seek peace because peace has already been cultivated consistently. They no longer wait until fear appears to build faith because faith has already been strengthened daily. And when battles finally come, as they do for every person, they discover something powerful. The struggle may be real, but their spirit is no longer weak because authority was built before the battle ever arrived. Fear gains power when it is allowed to speak first, but fear loses influence when faith speaks before it has the opportunity to dominate the mind. Many people do not realize how quickly fear attempts to establish control over their thoughts each day. Fear often enters quietly through small worries, negative expectations, stressful thoughts, or uncertainty about what may happen next. If those thoughts are entertained without resistance, fear begins shaping emotions, expectations, and decisions. The human mind naturally moves in the direction of its strongest focus. If fear becomes the dominant voice internally, everything begins feeling heavier and more overwhelming. Small problems appear larger. Temporary delays feel permanent. Uncertainty creates panic. And over time, fear begins controlling how a person experiences life emotionally. This is why it matters which voice speaks first. If fear speaks first every morning, the heart begins moving toward anxiety before the day even begins. Thoughts such as, "What if something goes wrong?" or "I don't think I can handle today," immediately shape the emotional atmosphere. The mind becomes tense, and the body responds to that tension. Before any actual problem appears, fear has already created emotional exhaustion. But when faith speaks first, something completely different happens internally. Faith-filled words interrupt fear before it gains momentum. Instead of allowing anxiety to establish control, the person begins declaring truth. "God is with me today. I will walk in peace. Fear will not dominate my mind." I have strength for every challenge. I trust God's guidance. Those words are not empty statements. They begin redirecting focus away from fear and toward truth. The mind starts aligning with peace instead of panic. Even if circumstances remain uncertain, the heart becomes steadier because faith established the atmosphere first. One of the greatest dangers of fear is repetition. Fear becomes stronger the more it is repeated mentally and verbally. Many people unknowingly rehearse fear throughout the day by constantly imagining worst-case scenarios or speaking negative outcomes repeatedly. This repetition deepens fear's influence until it begins feeling natural. But faith also grows through repetition. Every time a person chooses to speak faith instead of fear, they weaken fear's control and strengthen spiritual confidence. Over time, this repeated choice changes the entire inner atmosphere of the mind and heart. Another important truth is that fear often exaggerates reality. Fear magnifies problems and minimizes hope. It convinces people that temporary situations are permanent and that challenges are larger than they truly are. Fear creates distorted perception, but faith restores proper perspective. Faith does not deny difficulties exist. Instead, it refuses to allow those difficulties to become greater than God's promises. Faith says, "This situation is real, but it is not final." That mindset changes emotional response dramatically. A fearful mind reacts emotionally to every challenge. A faith-filled mind remains steadier because it believes there is still hope beyond present conditions. Fear also affects physical and emotional well-being. Constant fear creates tension, stress, exhaustion, and emotional instability. A person consumed by fear struggles to rest mentally because the mind is always preparing for negative outcomes. But faith-filled thinking creates calmness. It brings peace into the inner world and reduces emotional pressure. This is why speaking faith daily is so important. When a person consistently begins the day with faith-filled confession, fear loses the opportunity to establish dominance early. Instead of starting the morning overwhelmed, the person starts aligned with peace and confidence. Over time, this practice transforms the mind deeply. The person no longer reacts to every challenge with panic. Negative thoughts lose some of their power. Peace becomes easier to maintain. Another powerful truth is that fear weakens decision-making. Fearful people often hesitate, avoid opportunities, or make emotionally driven decisions because anxiety clouds clarity. But faith brings stability and clearer thinking. A person walking in faith responds thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively. Faith also strengthens endurance. Fear causes people to quit quickly because it convinces them that difficulties will never improve. But faith-filled thinking allows a person to continue moving forward even during uncertainty. It keeps hope alive during waiting seasons. This does not mean fear never attempts to return. Fear may still appear through circumstances, negative reports, or unexpected problems. But when faith has been consistently practiced, fear no longer dominates the heart the same way. The person becomes quicker at recognizing fearful thinking and replacing it with truth. Another important aspect is identity. A person constantly controlled by fear begins identifying as weak or helpless. But a person who consistently speaks faith begins identifying with strength, peace, and authority. This shift changes how they carry themselves emotionally and spiritually. Eventually, faith becomes more natural than fear. The mind begins turning toward truth automatically. Peace rises more quickly after difficult moments. Confidence grows stronger even before visible circumstances change. And this transformation happens because faith was allowed to speak first consistently. When faith speaks first, fear loses its opportunity to shape the atmosphere of the mind. When truth enters first, anxiety struggles to dominate. When peace is established early, pressure loses much of its power later. Because the voice that speaks first often becomes the direction the heart follows throughout the day. Morning confession has the power to renew the mind and strengthen inner peace because the beginning of the day is one of the most important moments for shaping emotional and spiritual atmosphere. Before responsibilities begin, before outside voices start speaking, and before pressure enters the mind, there is a brief window for thoughts and words establish direction for the entire day. Many people ignore this moment, but what fills the mind first often continues influencing emotions and decisions for hours afterward. A person who begins the morning with stress, fear, or negative thinking often carries that emotional heaviness throughout the day. Anxiety begins speaking before faith has a chance to rise. Worry becomes the first mental focus. The heart feels burdened before any challenge even appears. Over time, this pattern creates emotional exhaustion because the mind starts each day already overwhelmed. But morning confession changes the atmosphere completely. When a person intentionally begins the day speaking truth, peace, and faith, the mind begins aligning with stability rather than fear. Confessions such as, "I will walk in peace today. My mind will remain calm. God is guiding my steps. I refuse to surrender to anxiety. I have strength for every challenge ahead," begins renewing the inner world immediately. The reason this matters so much is because the mind follows repeated focus. Thoughts that are entertained repeatedly become dominant thought patterns over time. If fear is repeated daily, fear becomes stronger. If peace and truth are repeated daily, faith and calmness become stronger. This is why consistent morning confession is powerful. It creates mental renewal through repetition. Many people struggle emotionally not because they lack potential for peace, but because their minds have been trained toward fear for years. Negative thinking becomes automatic when practiced repeatedly. Worry becomes habitual. Anxiety begins feeling normal because it has been reinforced consistently through thoughts and words. But the mind can be retrained. Morning confession interrupts old mental patterns and introduces new ones. Instead of allowing fear to dominate immediately after waking, the person intentionally establishes truth first. Over time, the brain begins adapting to this new direction. Peace becomes more familiar. Fear loses some of its automatic influence. Another important truth is that inner peace does not usually happen accidentally. Peace must be cultivated intentionally. Many people expect calmness while constantly feeding their minds with stress, negativity, and fearful thinking. But peace grows where truth and faith are consistently planted. Morning confession plants those seeds daily. When a person wakes up and immediately speaks faith-filled words, they are creating emotional alignment with peace before the pressures of life begin speaking. This preparation changes how the rest of the day is experienced internally. Challenges may still arise. Unexpected situations may still happen. Pressure may still appear. But a renewed mind responds differently than an anxious mind. A renewed mind pauses instead of panicking. A renewed mind remembers truth instead of immediately assuming defeat. A renewed mind recovers more quickly because peace has already been established internally. Another reason morning confession strengthens peace is because it redirects focus. Fear naturally pulls attention toward problems, uncertainties, and worst-case scenarios. If those thoughts dominate early in the day, emotional tension increases quickly. But confession shifts focus toward truth, strength, and God's promises. This shift in focus changes emotional experience significantly. A person focused entirely on problems feels overwhelmed. A person focused on truth feels steadier even during difficulty. Morning confession also strengthens emotional resilience. People who begin the day with negative thinking often become emotionally reactive throughout the day. Small frustrations feel larger because their emotional foundation was already unstable. But people who establish peace early tend to remain calmer during stressful moments because their inner atmosphere is stronger. This does not mean they never feel pressure. It means pressure no longer controls them as easily. Another powerful aspect of morning confession is consistency. One peaceful morning may encourage temporarily, but long-term renewal happens through daily repetition. Every morning a person chooses truth over fear, they are strengthening new mental pathways. Over time, the renewed mindset becomes more natural. Eventually, faith-filled thinking begins happening automatically. Peace rises more quickly after stressful moments. Negative thoughts lose some of their power. This transformation may feel gradual, but it becomes deeply rooted over time. Morning confession also shapes expectation. A person who wakes up expecting stress often notices negativity more throughout the day. But a person who wakes up declaring peace begins expecting guidance, wisdom, and strength instead. Their perspective changes because expectation influences perception. Another important truth is that what enters the mind first often lingers the longest. This is why beginning the day with prayer, scripture, and confession matters so much. It fills the mind with truth before distractions and fear attempt to dominate attention. Over time, this practice builds a deeply rooted inner calmness. The person becomes less emotionally controlled by circumstances because peace has become established internally through daily renewal. Eventually, mornings stop being moments of anxiety and become moments of preparation and alignment. The person no longer wakes up feeling defeated before the day begins. Instead, they rise with growing confidence, steadiness, and peace. And all of this begins through simple but powerful daily confession that renews the mind and strengthens the heart one morning at a time. Consistency in spiritual discipline is what transforms temporary inspiration into lasting inner strength. Many people experience moments of motivation, emotional uplift, or spiritual awareness, but those moments often fade because they are not supported by daily practice. Real transformation does not come from occasional intensity, it comes from steady, repeated alignment with truth over time. A person may hear something powerful and feel change for a short period. They may feel encouraged, more hopeful, or more confident. But if that encouragement is not reinforced through consistency, old patterns of thinking gradually return. Fear reappears. Doubt regains influence. Emotional instability begins to creep back in. This is because the mind naturally returns to what it has been trained to repeat most often. Consistency breaks that cycle. When a person consistently prays, consistently confesses truth, and consistently renews their thinking, they begin forming new internal patterns. These patterns slowly replace old habits of fear and negativity. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes more natural. Faith begins replacing fear as the default response. Peace becomes easier to maintain. Confidence becomes stronger and more stable. Many people struggle not because they lack understanding, but because they lack consistency. They start strong but do not continue long enough for transformation to take root. They speak faith for a few days, then stop when emotions fluctuate or when results are not immediate. But spiritual growth does not depend on short bursts of effort, it depends on ongoing commitment. Just as physical strength is built through repeated exercise over time, spiritual strength is built through repeated faith practices. A single workout does not make the body strong. Similarly, a single moment of inspiration does not make the spirit strong. Strength develops gradually through repetition. Consistency also affects mental patterns. The mind is shaped by what it hears most often. If fear is repeatedly spoken or thought, it becomes a dominant mental pathway. But if truth is consistently spoken and meditated upon, new mental pathways begin forming. These pathways eventually become the default way of thinking. This is why daily confession and meditation on truth are so important. They slowly reshape the internal landscape of thought. At first, changes may feel small. Fear may still appear occasionally. Old thoughts may still try to return, but consistency weakens those old patterns over time. One of the greatest challenges people face is impatience. They want immediate transformation. They expect quick results. But inner change often takes time because deep-rooted patterns cannot be replaced instantly. What has been built over years cannot always be undone in a few days. However, what matters is not speed, but direction. Consistency ensures direction is maintained. Every day a person chooses truth over fear, they are moving in the right direction. Every day they choose faith over doubt, they are strengthening a new foundation. Every day they continue. Even when emotions fluctuate, transformation is quietly happening beneath the surface. Another important truth is that consistency builds emotional resilience. People who are inconsistent often experience extreme emotional swings. They feel strong one day and weak the next because their foundation is unstable. But consistent spiritual discipline creates steadiness. The emotional highs and lows become less intense because the inner life is being stabilized daily. Consistency also strengthens endurance. Life includes waiting seasons, delays, and moments where nothing seems to change externally. During those times, inconsistent people often give up. But consistent people remain steady because their strength is not based on immediate results, it is based on established discipline. Another powerful effect of consistency is identity formation. What a person repeatedly does becomes part of who they are. A person who consistently speaks fear begins identifying with limitation, but a person who consistently speaks faith begins identifying with strength, peace, and confidence. Over time, identity begins to shift. This shift is not emotional alone. It becomes deeply rooted in how a person sees themselves. And when identity changes, behavior changes. Decisions change. Reactions change. Even expectations about the future begin to change. Consistency also builds trust within the heart. Each day a person practices faith. Even when circumstances have not changed, they are strengthening trust in truth rather than feelings. They begin to realize that truth is stable even when emotions are not. This realization brings stability during difficult seasons. Instead of being controlled by fear when challenges arise, a consistent person has already built internal strength to respond with faith and calmness. They are not starting from zero each time a problem appears. They are responding from a foundation that has been built over time. Another important truth is that consistency creates long-term transformation that emotion alone cannot produce. Emotion may inspire change, but consistency sustains it. Without consistency, emotional experiences fade and old patterns return. But with consistency, transformation becomes permanent. Eventually, faith-filled thinking becomes natural. Peace becomes more dominant than anxiety. Hope becomes stronger than discouragement. And the inner life becomes stable even when external circumstances remain uncertain. And all of this begins not through occasional effort, but through daily commitment, small, repeated acts of faith that gradually build a strong, unshakable inner life over time. Renewing the mind is one of the most essential parts of developing a stable and victorious inner life, because every action, reaction, and decision begins first in thought. A person does not suddenly become fearful, confident, discouraged, or strong in a single moment. These states are formed gradually through repeated thinking patterns over time. The mind becomes shaped by what it consistently focuses on, and those patterns eventually determine emotional responses and outward behavior. Many people struggle in life not because their circumstances are impossible, but because their thinking patterns have been shaped by fear, doubt, and negative repetition. When the mind is constantly exposed to worry, limitation, and discouragement, those thoughts begin forming strong internal pathways. Eventually, even when situations are not as severe as they appear, the mind reacts as if they are overwhelming. This is because perception has been shaped by repeated mental focus. Renewing the mind begins with awareness that thoughts can be changed. Many people assume their thinking patterns are fixed, but thoughts are not permanent. They are formed through repetition and can be reshaped through intentional focus. This realization is powerful because it shows that inner transformation is possible. The process of renewing the mind involves replacing old patterns with truth. It is not enough to simply try to stop negative thinking. The mind must be redirected towards something stronger. Fear-based thoughts are removed without being replaced. The mind becomes empty and often returns to old patterns automatically. But when truth is consistently introduced, new pathways begin forming. Every time a person chooses to focus on truth instead of fear, they are strengthening new mental patterns. Every time they speak faith instead of doubt, they are reinforcing renewal. Every time they redirect their thoughts toward peace instead of panic, transformation is taking place internally. This process requires patience because mental renewal does not happen instantly. Thoughts that have been repeated for years do not disappear immediately, but consistency gradually weakens old patterns and strengthens new ones. Over time, what once required effort becomes more natural. One of the biggest challenges in renewing the mind is emotional resistance. Feelings often try to reinforce existing thought patterns. If a person has lived in fear for a long time, their emotions may resist peace. If they have experienced repeated disappointment, their mind may expect negative outcomes even when situations improve. But renewing the mind requires choosing truth above emotion. This does not mean ignoring feelings, but it means not allowing feelings to control thinking. A renewed mind learns to recognize emotional responses without surrendering to them. Instead of accepting fear as truth, it evaluates fear and replaces it with truth-based thinking. Another important aspect of mind renewal is focus. What a person consistently focuses on becomes magnified in their experience. If focus remains on problems, problems feel larger and more overwhelming. But when focus shifts toward truth, strength, and possibility, emotional stability begins increasing. Many people unintentionally strengthen fear by constantly replaying negative scenarios in their minds. They imagine worst-case outcomes repeatedly, which increases anxiety and emotional pressure. Renewing the mind involves breaking that cycle and intentionally redirecting attention toward truth and peace. Prayer plays a significant role in this process because it creates moments of mental clarity. In prayer, the mind becomes less influenced by external noise and more open to truth and stability. Over time, consistent prayer helps reshape thought patterns by reinforcing peace and alignment with truth. Another powerful truth is that renewed thinking changes emotional responses. A mind filled with fear reacts quickly and intensely to pressure, but a renewed mind responds more calmly. It pauses, evaluates, and responds from a place of stability rather than panic. This shift reduces emotional instability and creates greater resilience during challenges. Renewing the mind also affects decision-making. A confused or fearful mind often makes rushed or emotionally driven decisions. But a renewed mind thinks more clearly and chooses more wisely because it is not dominated by fear. This leads to better long-term outcomes because decisions are based on stability rather than anxiety. Identity also begins to shift through renewed thinking. When a person consistently thinks in alignment with truth, they begin to see themselves differently. Instead of identifying with limitation or failure, they begin identifying with strength, growth, and possibility. This change in identity influences behavior, confidence, and expectations about life. Another important truth is that renewal is continuous. The mind is constantly exposed to new influences every day. Without ongoing renewal, old patterns can slowly return. This is why daily practice is essential. Consistency keeps the mind aligned with truth and prevents regression into old thinking habits. Over time, a renewed mind produces peace, not because external conditions are perfect, but because internal alignment has changed. Fear loses dominance. Confusion loses strength. Anxiety loses control. And peace becomes the natural state of thinking. Eventually, renewed thinking becomes a lifestyle. It is no longer something forced or occasional. It becomes the default way a person processes life. Challenges still appear, but they no longer dominate the inner world. And when the mind is consistently renewed, the entire direction of life begins to change, because outward experience always follows the condition of the inner world over time. Expectation is one of the most powerful inner forces shaping how a person experiences every moment of life, even though many people rarely recognize its influence. What a person consistently expects becomes the lens through which they interpret reality. It affects emotions, decisions, reactions, and long-term direction in ways that are often subtle at first, but deeply influential over time. A person who expects difficulty begins to interpret situations through a negative filter. Even neutral events can feel threatening or discouraging because the mind has already been trained to anticipate problems. Small delays feel like confirmation of failure. Temporary setbacks feel like permanent loss. This creates emotional tension because expectation is constantly preparing the heart for the worst outcome. On the other hand, a person who expects good begins to interpret situations differently. This does not mean they ignore challenges, but their internal expectation is oriented toward possibility rather than limitation. Even when facing difficulty, they remain open to change, growth, and unexpected help. Their emotional experience is less dominated by fear because expectation is not rooted in negativity. Expectation also influences emotional energy at the beginning of each day. When a person wakes up expecting stress, their mind immediately begins preparing for pressure. This creates emotional heaviness before the day even unfolds. But when a person wakes up expecting peace, strength, and guidance, their emotional starting point is completely different. The inner atmosphere is calmer because expectation has already shaped their mindset. This is why expectation is so important. It sets the tone of the heart before external events begin speaking. One of the most powerful truths about expectation is that it influences perception. Two people can go through the same situation but experience it completely differently depending on what they expect. One may see only obstacles, while the other sees lessons or opportunities. One becomes discouraged, while the other becomes reflective and hopeful. The difference is not only in the situation but in the expectation behind interpretation. Expectation also plays a major role in perseverance. Life includes delays, unanswered questions, and seasons where progress is not immediately visible. During those times, expectation determines whether a person continues or gives up. A low expectation mindset interprets delay as failure, but a faith-filled expectation understands delay as part of a process still unfolding. Many people lose hope not because nothing is happening, but because their expectation weakens during waiting. They assume silence means absence and delay means denial. But expectation rooted in faith understands that unseen progress can still be taking place even when visible results have not yet appeared. Expectation also shapes speech. People naturally speak in alignment with what they expect internally. A person expecting failure often speaks defeat, limitation, and discouragement. But a person expecting progress begins speaking hope, strength, and possibility. These spoken expectations reinforce internal beliefs and gradually shape behavior over time. Over time, expectation becomes a cycle. What a person expects influences what they notice. What they notice influences what they believe. What they believe influences how they act. And how they act influences outcomes. This cycle can either strengthen life or weaken it depending on the direction of expectation. Faith-filled expectation does not deny reality. It acknowledges present circumstances but refuses to accept them as final conclusions. It allows a person to say, "This is where I am now, but this is not where I will remain." That mindset creates resilience during uncertainty and emotional stability during pressure. Expectation also strengthens emotional resilience. People with low expectation become easily discouraged because every setback feels like confirmation of failure. But people with strong expectation of good are more resilient. They recover faster emotionally because their internal belief system is not easily destroyed by temporary difficulty. Another powerful aspect of expectation is awareness. A person who expects nothing good often overlooks opportunities even when they appear. Their mind filters out possibility. But a person with positive expectation becomes more alert. They begin noticing doors, ideas, and moments of favor that others may miss completely. Expectation also prepares the heart for outcomes. A person living in constant expectation of failure is often emotionally unprepared when something good happens. But a person who lives with faith-filled expectation becomes mentally and emotionally ready to receive and sustain positive change when it comes. Over time, expectation shapes identity. A person who constantly expects failure begins identifying with limitation. But a person who consistently expects growth, favor, and progress begins identifying with strength and possibility. This identity then influences long-term behavior and direction. Ultimately, expectation determines how life is experienced internally. It does not guarantee immediate change, but it deeply influences interpretation, emotional response, and daily mindset. Life feels very different depending on whether expectation is rooted in fear or faith. And when expectation is aligned with faith, a person begins to walk with quiet confidence even in uncertainty. They may not have all the answers, but they carry an inner assurance that their future is not defined by present conditions and that change is still possible even when it has not yet appeared. So don't let this just be something you hear and forget, because the difference between a defeated day and a victorious life often begins with one decision. What you agree with in your mind and what you declare with your mouth. Start taking authority before the pressure starts speaking. Start your mornings with faith, not fear. And if this message spoke to you, don't walk away the same commit to applying it daily, because transformation doesn't come from listening once, it comes from living it consistently. If you want more messages like this, stay connected, stay disciplined, and keep choosing victory, because your life changes the moment your words do.